I'm just saying. But I did want to explain that in case anybody missed it. But as far as the topic at hand today, this is going to be a fun one. I've been wanting to talk about this for a couple days now, actually. Because frankly, and I get why people are excited about this. I mean, one of the most exciting ideas about crypto, or which is within the realm of crypto, it is the idea of a supply shock. It's a powerful concept. If supply dries up while demand increases, price has no choice but to move higher. So that idea is especially tempting for XRP right now because people are seeing two very different numbers and wondering which one is real. So on the one hand, you hear that there are around 16 billion XRP on exchanges, and on the other hand, you hear claims that there's actually only about 1.5 billion XRP left on exchange. That's quite a disparity. So if the smaller number were literally true, that would be explosive for price. It would mean there's almost no supply left to absorb new demand. That's what that would mean. So I get why people are getting excited. I understand exactly why this topic has captured so much attention, and it is backed by actual data. And so, but before going further, I do want to be clear, I do not have a financial background of any kind. I am not offering financial advice, and you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto related, but just as a hobby and just fun. All right, so let's slow things down just a little bit and explain what's actually happening here because the truth is interesting on its own. Frankly, it doesn't really require any exaggeration. I'm getting a spam call. Thanks for ruining this hot jam, you little baby back bitches. Oh my God, the spam calls. If I could just go on a side tangent for just a moment, it's the incessant text messages from spammers. And the new one they got now? Tell me in the comment section if any of you have had this happen. They are now sending me Microsoft Outlook calendar invites for events that they hope that I'll just hop on. I kid you not. These freaking scammers, it really grinds me. But anyway, they're stepping on my trip. But anyway, I do want to note here. So the overall argument that I'm going to be making in this video, it's not something that I've seen anyone else in the XRP community articulate. At least not exact, by parts of it you may have heard articulated, but I'm going to really break this down, the dynamics of this in terms of supply and demand, supply shock, all that. And then I think I'm right about this, so I hope that you find me to be persuasive. If not, then articulate an argument against me. I'll be curious to hear about that. But I do strongly believe that I'm correct. But we got headlines like this. Here's an example from Block Onami. XRP ETF supply shock looms as exchange balances drop to 1.5 billion. So what we're talking about is on all exchanges on the planet, there only being 1.5 billion XRP. And that's it on exchanges. That's the concept. That's what people are thinking. And that's out of a max supply of 100 billion. So you're talking about 1.5%. Then obviously there's a bunch that's in escrow and a small amount has been burned. And so there's this post, and this is the one that really got people going. This is just from a few days ago, and for understandable reasons. And so this individual, not somebody I'm familiar with, at unknown DLT. DLT, of course, stands for Doritos Locos Tacos. Everyone knows that. But he's sharing this chart from Glassnode, fantastic on-chain NLRM. And he wrote, XRP ETFs are absorbing supply with only about 1.5 billion XRP left on exchanges and about 750 million absorbed in weeks. A supply shock is likely by early 2026. This aligns with the Clarity Act, forcing price discovery and enabling real institutional use. 2026 is the inflection point where XRP shifts from speculation to global liquidity infrastructure. Okay, so first, I will note that this chart is real. And as you can see, it is highlighting what they have labeled as a balance on exchange. Okay, and so that's what the green line is. And the black line is it's just the price of XRP going back towards basically the beginning of this year, 25. And what he is noting here in terms of, I got to speak more soft and through I got to get through this. But anyway, so the chart's real. The chart actually is real. As far as the assertion pertaining to XRP ETFs, I don't fully agree, as I will articulate. Let me circle back to this. I just want you to know what the arguments are, and then I'm going to lay into this in terms of what I actually think. But on the flip side, you get a headline like this one. Top validator says there is no XRP supply shock as exchanges still hold nearly 16 billion XRP. Well, that's a lot. And so you got this post from Vet, and Vet is, on X here, he's an XRP Ledger DUNL validator. And so he does know his stuff. I think that would be fair to say. And here is his argument from literally yesterday. He wrote, there is no XRP supply shock on exchange. Number one, holders have close to 16 billion XRP on exchanges readily available. Plenty for anyone to get some. Two, if the price goes up or down, any one of you who has no XRP on exchanges could just send theirs within 3 to 4 seconds to one. Number 3, thus, also XRP listed on order books for sale is dynamic. Elastic, it can thicken or dry out in seconds back and forth. Sometimes $10 million buying can push price higher, and sometimes $100 million in buying doesn't stop price going down. Okay, and the points he's making there are solid, but I want to expand upon this. I think directionally he's right, but I do want to expand upon those thoughts just a bit. But he shared this screen grab showing that on all exchanges, at the time he posted this anyway, you're talking about almost 16 billion XRP, right? And you can see that on various sites. Here's a site that he shared that you can use as a source. It's one of the XRP rich lists out there. And so you can see out of all the exchanges on the planet, the number is now just shy of 15.9 billion XRP on cryptocurrency exchanges as I record. And that is a real figure. Like there's, I mean, let me break it down. Okay, so the XRP $16 billion figure, or not billion, the 16 billion XRP figure, that comes from XRP Ledger focused tools. So, so what they're doing is they're looking directly at the ledger. And what they're doing is they're grouping wallets by who controls them. And so when these tools, like the one on your screen here, add up all exchange-controlled wallets, including hot wallets and cold storage wallets, the total comes out to nearly 16 billion XRP. And you can see, again, that's what's reported on screen, right? It's the same thing that VET reported. And this is real, it's real data, okay? But so this is the total amount of XRP that exchanges are, they hold in terms of custody on behalf of its own clients. Its own customers and their own operations. So it would be their XRP too. So technically that number is almost certainly, the real number would be almost certainly higher than 16 billion XRP. And that's because there are likely at least some XRP wallets the exchanges operate, but that aren't labeled as owned by the exchanges. So therefore we just don't know that they own them. So yes, if all wallets were reported and included in that group, the number would be a lot higher. But we'll stick with the 16 billion number for the sake of simplicity. But I did want to mention these. But most of that 16 billion XRP is owned by the customers of various cryptocurrencies, the vast majority, and a smaller portion is owned outright by the exchange. So they do have their own supply on top. And I'll note, I think most people don't self-custody their XRP, unfortunately, at least from my perspective, unfortunately, which goes a long way to explain why exchange holdings are so high. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but to me, 16 billion, that sounds pretty damn high, but I get it. Look, there are nearly 7.5 million XRP wallets in existence, but about 6 million of those wallets only hold 500 XRP or less. Here you can look at a different rich list website to see that. Here, I'll highlight this section for you. For those of you looking at your screen, this is what I'm talking about. If you combine these two numbers, this is the number of total accounts for that bucket size of XRP. It comes out to about 6 million wallets hold 500 XRP or less. That's folks, that's about 80% of XRP wallets have only 500 XRP or less. So it doesn't take much to be one of the largest holders of XRP on the planet. And if you're listening to this video, I'm willing to bet that you're interested in XRP enough, just like I am. I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of you probably hold a lot more than that. I'm just going to hazard a guess there. And nothing against the people that hold less. I'm just sharing data because it is what it is. But look, at that level, most people clearly, they're not expecting life-changing wealth from their XRP. So I can intellectually understand why such people wouldn't be interested in spending time creating their own wallet and engaging in self-custody. I can wrap my brain around that concept, why they're not. Now, for me, the reason I felt incentivized to create my own wallet for self-custody is that it was my intention, even going back to 2017, it was my intention to buy a metric fuck ton of XRP, which I ultimately did. I did that over a span of a few years. And so I'm glad that I did. Given how much very real money I was investing in XRP, I was like, no, I need to be in charge. Absolutely. No exchanges. Hell no. Get your grubby mitts off this bitch. It's my XRP. Now, if I held, 5 XRP, am I going to go to the trouble of doing that? But anyway, so this 16 billion number, it only tells us who controls the XRP, though, which, of course, again, it's the exchanges. The exchanges control the account, but it doesn't tell us, if the XRP is for sale. The 16 billion on the exchange doesn't mean there's 16 billion for sale. That's not what that tells us. Most of that XRP is not sitting on order books. To be clear, the vast majority of of it is not. In fact, the vast majority of that 16 billion XRP, it's in cold storage, which rarely moves, which really shouldn't be surprising, because most people that own XRP don't move it most of the time, right? So the fact that the exchanges are holding it in cold storage, the vast majority of the time, not remotely surprising, not even a little. Now the 1.5 billion XRP figure, that comes from a very different type of data, and so I want to take some time to break this down because I haven't seen a great explanation from anybody on social media as to why we're seeing these two hugely different numbers, 16 billion and then 1.5 billion, which is true, right? But this 1.5 billion figure, it is real, but it comes from on-chain analytics from Glassnode, as I cited. I'm a huge fan of them, and they're tracking exchange balances, but in a more operational sense. So when they wrote on exchange, that's the label that they chose to use. You can see they wrote XRP balance on exchanges. That's the label they chose to use, and they wrote total XRP, but it's misleading people. It's not there. Glassnode's not trying to mislead people, but they used a label that made people think that it probably meant something that it doesn't. So see, these tools on Glassnode, they focus on wallets that are active and moving. So, they're measuring the XRP that is realistically in circulation on exchanges right now and closest to the mark, the stuff that may be for sale, example. So, this is the XRP. This is what they're tracking by their metric. This is the XRP that can actually hit the market quickly, without exchanges having to move funds out of cold storage, which again is where most of the XRP is. But, and it's easy for Glassnode to track this because effectively, think about it, all they'd have to do is look at the total XRP in all exchange wallets and then subtract all known cold storage wallets, and well, voila, right? The rest moves much more regularly, which is the metric that's on your screen here. It's just how they labeled it that's causing. But the data from Glassnode screen grab, it just shows the exchange balance, which is the green line that's on your screen here. It shows that it stayed relatively flat during the July price surge this year, 2025, when it hit its all-time high, obviously, of $3. And that suggests liquidity did not dry up during that exciting. Think about it. Sellers were able to meet demand without a meaningful drawdown in active exchange balances. Look at the green line. You can see it. You can see what I'm talking about. It's volatile a little bit, but it's largely flat, right? And so that means that XRP came out of cold storage and into hot wallets to meet the increased demand. Frankly, it's just simple supply and demand. It's like, duh. So the real change appears, though, if you're looking at the green line, the real change appears after the October 10th liquidation event, which was, of course, everybody's favorite day this year, obviously. But from that point forward, the exchange balance begins trending down. And it doesn't recover. On the chart, it doesn't recover, and it just hasn't to this point. And since spot XRP ETFs only went live mid-November, they can't explain the entire move, but it does make sense that ETF demand contributed to the continued decline afterward because the timing obviously lines up quite perfect. This is a very reasonable conclusion to come to, and it tracks to other data that we've been watching. So you can see again here, if you're looking at the screen where I'm moving my mouse, that would have been about October 10th, I'm sure. And so just off a cliff, right? Okay, but then look at this. Then you get to what would have been roughly the middle of November and just off a cliff again, which makes sense. It's just one more piece of evidence showing that, yeah, this is the accumulation of XRP for spot XRP. I buy that narrative. I think that's a high probability. Now, as far as the rest of what Unknown Doritos Locos Tacos is saying here, I don't agree with this narrative that there's going to be a supply shock imminently just because of that. But look, what this suggests is that active the sell side liquidity, it's obviously been tightening over time. That you can see it. Look at the green line, and so that means there's less XRP available for sale in hot wallets and cryptocurrency exchanges. So that's what we're actually looking at, which is, even though it's labeled basically the same, that's a different metric than that 16 billion. Okay, so if demand increases into that environment, price becomes much more sensitive, which is where that supply shock narrative actually starts to matter. So even though exchanges custody around 16 billion XRP, only a small fraction of that is actively liquid at any given time. So if demand suddenly increases, that's when fire will happen. And that actually is true. There's no question about it. So supply shocks are a real thing, and they've happened to XRP before throughout history. It's real. It's definitely real. So, if buyers start aggressively competing for a limited pool of liquid XRP that's for sale, price can move very fast. That can absolutely turn into a supply shock. What we're really talking about in this scenario It's just a demand increase without a huge increase in supply that's available for sale on exchanges. That's what we're actually. So you can't determine, though, if there's going to be a supply shock solely by looking at this data. That's the thing. You can't determine it solely based on this data, but it is fair to say that at any given moment, only a very small amount of XRP, very, very small percent. Most XRP in existence is in cold storage and or escrow. So that part is definitely true. And if a true supply shock happens, yes, it would be very bullish for XRP, duh. But keep in mind, even if that happens, at some point, absolutely should expect to see an increase of XRP flowing to exchanges from people who are ready to sell. And this is normal stuff, though. You don't know what price these people are going to feel incentivized to sell, but this is normal stuff. It happens all the time in moments of market euphoria. So, just as a hypothetical, if the demand for XRP increases 10x overnight, I'm just making that up, that will drive the price of XRP way high. And yes, some of that 16 billion in XRP that's in cold storage will end up available for sale as a result, but we don't know at what price levels those XRP owners will be interested in listing their XRP for sale on exchanges. That's the thing. But but when you're talking about spot XRP ETFs now holding over $1 billion worth of XRP. Look at this. This is the latest from Social Value. $1.14 billion worth of XRP. Yes, that is something that matters in terms of supply and demand, for sure. But it does not mean that we're on the precipice of having a supply shock right now just because of this data. There will be, because look, if exchanges start to get low on liquid XRP, what do you think is going to happen if price starts to go up? There will be more XRP coming. So that's why you need to have a huge supply shock or not supply shock, but you need to have a huge increase in demand if you want to see a supply. And so I do think the real fireworks are coming, but just a little bit further down the road. And when? Whenever the entire crypto market ends up in euphoria, that's when it'll happen. So we'll find out together. But I don't know about you folks, but I'm going to be here when it happens because it is coming at some. I made it through it. I'm going to wrap up here. I sort of have a voice, but thank you for hanging out with me and going through this with me as I finally enter puberty. I'm not a financial advisor.